Welcome to the Heartbeat of Money, where faith, purpose, and financial strategy collided. I'm your host, Jon P. Moffitt, and this just isn't another podcast. It's where we're going to talk about building real wealth, exiting your business the right way, and creating a legacy that outlives us. Let's get to the heartbeat of what truly matters. I want to welcome everybody today to the first episode of the Heartbeat of Money. This has been a very long time coming. I want to start by telling you why this show even exists. For years, I've been working with business owners, entrepreneurs, leaders, all who have built incredible companies. But when it comes to money, wealth, and legacy, the conversation kind of often stops with the numbers, and it's all about the numbers. And this podcast is going to be a little different. We're going to talk about the real side of money, the faith, the emotion, the transition, exit strategies, everything outside of just the numbers, and what it means to build wealth that serves your life. And it just doesn't own your life. You know, a lot of times the money owns your life and wealth owns your life. So we're going to dive into some things and talk a little bit more about that. I'm honored you're here. I'm very honored you're here. This is the first Heartbeat of Money podcast. So let's get started. I wanted to start by taking a moment and kind of letting you know a little bit about myself, what I've been through, what I've gone through. Not to take a lot of time, but you know, as a young boy, my family, we were entrepreneurs. My mom's family was in the restaurant business. My dad's side was in the construction business. And through my young adult life, I kind of worked in both. But one of the things that stuck out to me the most is I'll never forget the dinner table talks with my family. We were the type that sat down every night at dinner, and Dad had a gallon of milk on the ground, pouring us all milk around the table, meat and potatoes type of family. We're from Iowa, but you know they had an oven or something they wanted to buy, and I remember them not arguing, but not pleasantly talking about having to borrow money or get money from family because that's never fun, and they really had no idea about banks or banks would give them the money and how much it would cost or any of that stuff. And so, of course, they took the money from the family, and that never works out well. But at that period in time in my life, I realized that my family was not educated in the realm of wealth or banking or finance or any of those things. So at a very young age, I kind of made it a vow to myself that I would learn as much as I could about banking and finance and generational wealth, just because I wasn't surrounded by it. But I went to some pretty affluent schools where I saw a lot of kids that did have money and families that did have wealth. And so it was super intriguing to me to learn about that. And one of the things that happened is we didn't have enough money for college. So the only way that I could go to college was really to get a scholarship or take out student loans. And so I remember as a young boy, I told my mom, I'm going to play for the University of Iowa and I'm going to play for Hayden Fry. And, you know, the great thing about my parents is they were super encouraging for any dreams that we had. And I'll never forget that story because I used to visualize every day in my life, kind of like we do when we're starting a business or we're starting something, that you're going to be somewhere one day and you're going to be able to do it one day. And I think I was probably 12 years old when I started that dream and that journey. And it's kind of a funny story. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about it. I graduated from a junior college called Northern Iowa Community College. I used to go to my counselors every week and say, are my grades good enough to get into Iowa? And of course they were. I ended up, ironically enough, with getting 2 bachelor's degree there because I worked really hard on my grades. But the day I graduated from junior college, I called a good buddy of mine up that I had played football with, and he was down there. He was a blue chip All-American, and he was kicking butt down there. And I said, "Hey, man, I'd really like to come down and see if I can maybe make the team." And he's like, "Sure, man, come on down." He was super warm and loving and gave me the opportunity to come. I crashed on the floor in the apartment, and I woke up one morning and it was really cool. All the guys had all their gear on and they were going to work out. And I was like, "Hey, where you guys going?" They're like, "We're going to go over to the gym." And I was like, "All right, cool." I go, "Can I come along?" And they're like, "Sure, come along." And at that time, it was a makeshift gym. So I kind of snuck in and was working out, not with the team, but next to them. I kind of watched what they did and I was doing my thing off to the side. Well, for some reason that summer, all of the wide receivers had gone home for the summer. And so there was nobody to catch balls with the quarterback. So every day throughout the summer, I'd go out and I'd run routes and catch balls. And just living the dream, hoping one day I might be able to get the opportunity to even try out for the team. But spending the summer, honing in on my skills and practicing every day, a couple times a day. And I'll never forget, I was sitting in the locker room, made up locker room at the time. And one of the equipment guys came over and dropped a bag of, this is University of Iowa. This is Big Ten. Most shoes and clothes I've ever seen in my life. All my stuff had holes in it. Cleats were basically worn off. He drops this bag in front of me. He's like, "Hey man, you need to go register for classes if you want to make the team." And I was like, wow, I'm going to cry right now. I'm almost choked up. I never forget. I went out the hallway. I called my mom and I said, "Hey mom, I think I made the team." And she ran up there. We registered for classes. And just to tell you a little bit more about the story, it was like the first or second practice I was going in as the number one defensive backs. And all of a sudden they had these big towers at the University of Iowa. And I get this, they yelled on loudspeakers. And they're like, "Moffitt to the top field, Moffitt to the top field." And I'll never forget, I can't remember if it was Prez or Tommy Knight, or one of them says, "Hey man, you better get your butt up there. They don't usually call names out." So I sprinted up to the top field. As I got up there, one of the coaches grabbed me and sat me on the sideline. And I had no idea if I was in trouble or what was going on. And all of a sudden they called me in. They called me into the huddle, and I run in there, and all of a sudden I'm sitting there with all the number one guys at the University of Iowa. And a lot of these guys I had been playing catch with and working out with during the summer, so I knew them all. But I'll never forget what my good friend said to me. He looked me square in the eyes and he says, "It's about fucking time you got here, man." And that's life. We dream of where we want to be, and we have to go after it with just tenacity to get there. And when we do, it's such an amazing experience. I appreciate, let me take a moment and digress a little bit and talk about that story, because I believe in everything we do in business, we're always visualizing our business. We're visualizing the logo. We're visualizing what's next. But the one thing we don't do is we don't visualize our exit. We don't visualize selling the business. We don't visualize preparing the business to sell and what's next for us. And so I'm going to encourage you to, as I go through this and we start to learn about this podcast, we're going to talk a lot about spirit, faith, visualization. Later in life, I went through cancer, and, when you go through cancer, you have to focus on healing. You have to focus on getting better. And all of a sudden money stops. Like there's no more income, there's no more money, and you're really just trying to survive. And so all of these different times in life, you have these heartbeat of money, where money's there, it's not there. Luckily I made the team. They offered me a scholarship, and I was able to get some money there. Otherwise I'd had to take out student loans, which would have cost me a lot of money. But I've spent 25 years helping business owners, watching them be very successful financially, but still live with fear and anxiety and confusion about their money. And so, money isn't just dollars. It's about a heartbeat. It's tied to your faith, your family, and your purpose and your identity. So, this podcast, it's not a get rich quick show. That's not what we're about here. So many people that make money feel empty inside. I've helped owners sell companies for millions, and then they ask, "Okay, now what the heck am I going to do? Yeah, I've got my bucket list, but what am I going to do after that?" So, in this show, we're going to tackle a few things. We're going to talk about business exit strategies, valuations, real estate. We're going to get into the emotional fears and identity and purpose of money and how it works. And we're going to talk about the faith and your family and your legacy and what that means to you. This podcast is going to feel like church, therapy, and financial strategy session all in one, because that's what we really need to have the wealth that matters. And so, as we dive in with faith and identity, if your money owns you, you're broke no matter how rich you are. We're going to talk about how faith shapes your stewardship, and really how, depending on how you were raised, I was raised in a Catholic church, moved over into kind of Christianity. I kind of, personally feel like it's all the same thing. It doesn't matter to me kind of what your religion is. We all have our own beliefs. But I believe in there's a higher power and that we have the ability to create and manifest and have the life that we want. And what happens a lot of time based on what we grow up in and the conditioning we're around, it kind of stops that flow or that heartbeat of money to be manifested in our lives because of all the conditioning that we've gone through. And so, your personal belief system, it matters. It creates an identity for you. It creates what happens in your environment. So, there's many, many business owners that are really tied to their worth and to their business, and it identifies them. And so that identity, whether it's through faith or habit or conditioning, it really becomes who you are. And so owners they don't really know what their business is worth. They have an idea because they've worked hard hours and they've spent a lot of time in there. But they really don't understand what a business is worth or how to value it. Some people say it's so many multiples of your revenue or so many multiples of your net worth. And they give you all these numbers, but truly there are very specific things that transfer value and makes your company and your work and all your hard work worth more to buyers than other things. So, they're really good. Business owners are really good about building income machines that just make a ton of money. But at the end of the day, it's not a transferable asset. A business owner is only valuable for what somebody's willing to pay for it. And someone else can own it tomorrow. And so if you can think about as a business owner, if I were to walk away today, would my business run without me? And could I instruct somebody to run it? And I would say that probably most of us out there that are in the business community would say, no, not even close. I don't even know what would happen if I didn't go in tomorrow. The place would probably fall apart. And so these are just some good signs to think about, how to really start to manifest and think like I was thinking, hey, I'm going to play for the University of Iowa. I played on a bunch of teams and played a bunch of football before there, but I was visualizing playing for the University of Iowa, even though I was playing for Northern Iowa Area Community College, where we ended up having one of the best teams ever there. We won the RC Cola Bowl. And so we did it at a very high level, but at the same time, I was envisioning what was next and what I wanted to do next in life. And so business and exit readiness is another kind of category we're going to talk about in this podcast. And then family and generational wealth. I've seen families literally torn apart over money, where, somebody could owe you $50 and you walk around and go, man, that guy owes me money. That guy owes me money. The best advice I ever had one time, it was from a minister named Robert Brooks. And he said to me, he goes, don't ever give somebody money with the idea they're going to give it back to you. And this is kind of a biblical principle too. Give it as a gift. If you're going to give money to somebody, unless you're truly putting a loan document together and you're trying to be a bank and you're trying to invest in that way, if you're going to give money, just give it. Give it because you can and give it to help them out. Without intentional planning, from in your family, and it will really destroy a family. If you're not thinking about college and you're not thinking about what's next, and all those people that have daughters and their weddings are going to come up and you're kind of expected to pay for that wedding, you really have to plan and think about not only how to put money away for that, but how to put money into things to make money to pay for that, which is a different mindset. We're taught to save. One of the biggest things that we're taught is, get your money and save it, get your money and save it. That's not wealth. Wealth is get your money and put it into something to make money. And that's just a different mindset. And generational wealth is a whole nother level. It isn't money that's left behind. It's wisdom that's passed forward. I want you to think about that for a minute. Generational wealth isn't money left behind. It's wisdom that's passed forward. And so think about how you're passing your wisdom forward for generational wealth, whether it's money, whether it's a way to live, whether it's how to treat people. Wealth isn't always just monetarily. And so think of the ultra rich, multi rich and extremely rich. They pass on wisdom from generation to generation. And every once in a while, you get to have a mentor, somebody that shares a little bit of that wisdom with you that changes your perspective. And so we're going to dive into some of that in this podcast as well. And then fulfillment and purpose. What happens after your exit? Yeah, we can have a bucket list. We can jump through that bucket list, but many business owners have no plan of their post-exit. I mean, if I did a survey today, if anybody's listening, if I said, okay, how much have you thought about what you're going to do after you sell your business? Most of you say, I haven't even thought about selling my business. But how can you move past the end if you're not thinking about what's after that? And so Next Stage Wealth Story, we help people from all likes to start thinking about moving from profit to purpose. We do this through them thinking about mentorship in the areas that they feel purposeful in. We also talk about impact investments, like where to put their money that can mostly impact the things that they care about the most. And so those are some of the areas that we're going to talk about in this podcast. Common traps that people run into is they built their companies around themselves and they're the key man. That's why a lot of times when you're going through transactions or you're borrowing a bunch of money, they might ask you for key man risk insurance. So if something happens to you, they have some type of insurance policy to help them get through the tough times of teaching everybody what you do and what you know. A lot of business owners don't have a written exit plan. I don't care if it's simply like, I want to exit and move to Minnesota and go fishing all the time, but have some type of exit plan. No true leadership or bench. A lot of people are really fearful of teaching people what they know and all their knowledge and how to do what they do. And a lot of people are stuck in leases. I mean, I'm guessing that you're probably leasing your building. If you own your building, great job, because it allows for a much easier transition when you do go to sell your business. But if you're leasing your business, we're going to dive into some ideas around trying to move you into ownership, or at least negotiate those leases so that they don't cause major issues when you go to sell. And then the other one is the emotional fear. What happens if I sell? Like, what happens to my identity? What happens to me? And that's a real thing, because the business is something you've built. It's who you are. It identifies you. And what happens after that? And the other big, common trap is the false belief that revenue equals value. It's one of the things that, I can tell you, there was a business owner that had $3 million in revenue, but when we dug into the numbers, nobody wanted to buy it. His customer base was not diversified. He had a ton of concentration in his customer base. His contracts weren't transferable. He didn't put his contracts in a way that they could be transferable to new owners. And he didn't have any systems in place. It literally was just him, ran on just him. And so he wasn't really able to liquidate the business or capture any of that upside from all the hard work for the years. So where does the first wounds of money come from? When do we start to learn about money? And it's from our parents, it's from our childhood, it's from our church, it's from the society that we're around. They teach us, either we save money or we spend it like crazy, or, maybe we have those crazy uncles that never has a dime to his name and is always asking to borrow money. We grow up around an environment that shapes us, and it shapes us how we think about money. But I can tell you this, money flows through your life based on your beliefs and based on your actions. And that's why I call this podcast The Heartbeat of Money, because it kind of moves like a heartbeat. It's up and it's down and it's up and it's down. And sometimes it's real smooth, and sometimes you got a lot of it, and sometimes you don't have any of it. And so if you think about it that way, as you start to hone into the wisdom of the wealthy, as I always like to say, you'll start to understand, what you do when you get that big chunk of money, and what you do if you're investing and your money's a little low, and how you mentally deal with that emotion around that. Entrepreneurs often have money trauma, the fear of losing it, not having enough of it. They attach their worth in life to their net worth. And so, it really starts to identify them. You can talk about all kinds of things when it comes to fears. But, I remember my fear, one of my biggest fears when I was young is will I ever have enough to feel wealthy? And so, I really overcame money in my early age, because I didn't really have a lot growing up. And so to me, it was just something you used, um, for whatever you want, whether you wanted to buy something or you wanted to invest in a business, and it comes and it goes. And sometimes you got a lot and sometimes you don't. But, one thing that hit me is when I had cancer and money stopped, and I'm talking stopped. I didn't have a job. I couldn't work. I had to focus on healing. And my fear was, you know, would I ever be able to bounce back? Would I ever be able to make any type of money like I used to make? And, was I willing to put myself out there? So, for me, I went back to something that I knew, which was food. And I started a business in the food industry and grew it from the ground up, grassroots, step by step, and built it. And today it's successful. And I'm already thinking beyond what's next and preparing. I'm putting a lot of these principles into place in my own life. But there's a point where I had no money and I was starting from scratch. I had to go through cancer and I couldn't work. Um, so we don't talk enough about that emotional journey, because there were times where I was like, man, I'm not making any money. This isn't going to work. Should I go back to work for somebody, or should I go put my effort in and, put time in working for somebody? But it's emotionally exhausting at the end of the day. And it's emotionally exhausting, building wealth. And so all I can say is try to pick up some points and some tips and some wisdoms from this podcast as we drive into it. I've seen people have made $20 million but couldn't sleep at night because they still felt broke. And so you have to feel rich within who you are and what you do every day, and your money cannot really define you. So if you like kind of what this show is going to be about, I invite you to subscribe, share, or follow. Invite other people, to come on in here. Would love to hear it. If anybody from my mastermind team is listening to this, I'd love to collaborate with you and bring you on the show and talk to you a little bit. So here's what we're gonna go. The next episodes, we're gonna dive into the business valuation myths. That's gonna be a fun one. We're gonna get into what people think the value is and what the true values are. We're going to dive into building transferable value and what elements of your business create transferable value. We're going to talk about faith. We're going to talk about stewardship, and we're going to talk about how that impacts money and the heartbeat of money. And we're going to talk about the emotional resilience of the entrepreneur. So I just want to thank you for joining me on the Heartbeat of Money. In today's conversation, hit home and subscribe, leave a review, share with others, business owners or entrepreneurs who are walking their own wealth journey. And remember, wealth isn't about money. It's about what matters most. And until next time, stay focused, stay faithful, and keep building your legacy.